let's cut right to the chase. We need to have a serious talk about the cloud. And I'm not talking about that fluffy, abstract idea you see in commercials. I'm talking about the hard, physical reality of it all. A reality that, frankly, is way more fragile and dangerous than you've been led to believe. So the real question we're diving into today is a big one. Is the cloud just a war zone waiting to happen? Just look at this. This isn't some scene from a movie. This is the new reality we have to face. A data center, a real building full of servers becoming a military target. What happened right here completely changes the game for digital security. And to really get it, we have to start by dismantling the fundamental lie that we've all bought into. So to understand what's really going on, we first have to pull back the curtain on the central lie that's been propping this whole thing up, the very idea of the cloud itself.
You know, calling it the cloud might be the most brilliant and, yeah, the most misleading marketing trick of our time. It makes you think of something that's everywhere and nowhere, something that's fundamentally safe. But that's a fantasy. The cloud has a physical address. In fact, it has many. They're just giant power-guzzling buildings sitting in very specific places on a map. And as we're now seeing, those places can become targets.
Now, the event that sparked this whole conversation, well, it wasn't just some random act of violence. According to the analysis, it was something way more calculated. It was a test. A very, very physical test. According to reports, Iran's Fars news agency claimed that drone strikes hit Amazon Web Services facilities. And the reason they gave? Well, it's pretty chilling. They said it wasn't just about causing damage. It was a strategic probe. It was a test to see just how dangerously dependent the entire world has become on this centralized American tech infrastructure. And this brings us to a brand new and frankly terrifying term, physical formatting. Yeah, you can forget about your firewalls and your encryption keys for a second. This is about using real-world kinetic weapons, drones, missiles, to literally wipe out data infrastructure. It's a brutal wake-up call that your two-factor authentication means absolutely nothing when a drone can reformat the entire server rack from the outside. So the physical threat is obviously real, but it's actually layered on top of an economic problem that makes the whole situation even worse. It's a trap, really, one that's built with hundreds of billions of dollars. $200 billion. Just let that number sink in. That's the kind of money giants like Amazon have spent on building these physical data centers. At this point, they're not just tech companies, they're the biggest, most centralized landlords on the planet. But this all raises a terrifying question. Have they built the future of technology, or have they just built a series of high-risk, high-value targets? The source material calls them cyber dungeons. This quote from tech commentator Corey Quinn just nails the twisted logic of this whole business model. You know the famous shared responsibility model? Well, it just got a dark update. When a drone hits their data center, AWS is responsible for their broken hardware. But you? Oh, you're responsible for paying the massive bill to get your data, your entire business, out of the wreckage and somewhere safe. And that brings us to our next critical concept, traffic ransom. It's such a perfect way to describe egress fees in this context. It is literally the price you have to pay to get your own data back during an emergency. The act of fleeing a burning building costs you a fortune. You start to realize the billing department can be even more ruthless than the enemy's drones. So let's recap. The physical layer is a target, and the financial model basically holds you hostage. So what does that make you, the customer? Well, according to this analysis, the diagnosis is not good. Think about this. In the chaos after the attacks, you had companies built on top of AWS, like Snowflake and Red Hat, reportedly telling their own customers to run for the hills, to migrate away immediately. That panic tells you everything you need to know. It exposes just how fragile the whole ecosystem is. It's all built on a foundation that none of them actually control. This whole situation is perfectly explained by a theory called the Pluvius curve. It's simple, really. Think of the cloud providers as the landlords. They own the physical ground. Everyone else, every startup, every big company, is just a tenant renting a spot. So when that foundational landlord layer gets shaken, whether it's by a drone or just a massive power outage, all the tenants on top face a collective disaster. And that brings us to the heart of the diagnosis. This model turns businesses into digital sharecroppers. You do all the work. You plant the seeds. You build incredible value, your data, your services, but you don't own the land. You are completely at the mercy of the landlord's risks, whether that's a sudden rent hike or, as we now see, a drone strike. Okay, so that is a pre-bleak picture. That's the problem. But this analysis doesn't just leave you there. It actually proposes a solution, a way for you to stop being a digital tenant and start becoming a sovereign owner. And the core of that solution is this idea of an independent clearing layer. The best way to think about it is like a strategic control panel that you own, one that sits above all the cloud providers. It's a layer of tech that lets you manage and move your applications across multiple clouds, effectively decoupling you from any single point of failure. So how do you actually do this? Well, the path to what's called protocol sovereignty really comes down to 3 key steps. First, you have to decouple your systems from the proprietary APIs that lock you into one vendor. Second, you build or adopt this independent clearing layer for orchestration. And third, you use that layer to take back control, to gain the power to schedule and move your workloads wherever you need them whenever you want. This quote from the source material, which is attributed to this persona, Pluvius, the 1983 rain god, just hammers the whole point home. It completely reframes what it means to be a startup today. If you don't control the fundamental protocols your business runs on, you're not some nimble innovator. You're just a tenant farmer, working on the side of a volcano, praying it doesn't erupt. So we're going to end with this question, and it's a question I think you really need to ask yourself and your company. After looking at all of this, the physical risks, the traffic ransom, this whole landlord-tenant dynamic, what's your answer? Are you building a truly sovereign business, or are you just a digital sharecropper, paying rent on a very convenient and very physical target?